I would encourage people to take the time to set yourself up so that you don't have to think about money all the time, because there is such freedom in that, and it is a great feeling.
Hi, I'm Danielle, and welcome back to Making Space. Not just a podcast, but a place for honest, open conversations about where people have been and who they're becoming. So today's episode is about finances, which feels super grown. I feel like over the course of this season, the podcast has also been growing up, but more on that later. Money is something that looms over all of our heads as we get older, but as we discuss in this episode, it doesn't necessarily have to. I'm super excited to introduce today's guest because in some ways, she's a bit of a celebrity, at least to me. I originally met my friend Jadyn through church, but to the world, she's at Jadyn Finance on TikTok. She's the kind of person that can turn a casual lunch into a personal finance seminar where everyone is suddenly taking notes and asking questions because of her wealth of knowledge on this topic despite her age. She's been on Forbes Boston 30 Under 30 list, so trust me when I say that she knows what she's talking about. But outside of her financial expertise, she's genuinely such a kind and candid friend, which means that she gives the best advice. So I'm thrilled to have her on the podcast. Go ahead and get your notes out if you haven't already. So, what is something you have learned or that you're currently learning that you wish your younger self could have known?
I would say, let's see, something that I am currently learning generally is that it's okay to have like your people, and it doesn't need to be every person that you meet. So I think when I was younger, I wanted to just get to know everybody, be friends with everybody. And I've realized that that is simply not possible or reasonable. And there's much more joy in like having people who know you well and people who you know well, who you can really like rely on and be vulnerable with and support. So yeah, I would say like as I get older, I realize like it's okay to have your people and you don't need to be like best friends with everybody. Of course, be kind to everybody, but it's nice to have your people who you like, know exactly who to call when you have good news to share or when life is hard. And so that's been really a great thing to learn. And it just gives me more peace and enjoyment in my friendships to know that it's not like I'm like, should I be meeting new people? Like, no, let me enjoy my friendships that I have and the relationships that I have. So yeah, generally that's something that I have been learning.
Yeah, that's so good. And I think like even being in this season of being back in school has had me
hmm
reflecting on that, like unintentionally, because you're around so many new people and it's like, oh my gosh, like do I have to get to know everyone? Do I have to like be
Right.
best friends with everyone? It's just not the case. Hopefully you're gonna take some people from this season with you, like as you move on in
Yep.
life, but you do already have that foundation. And so yeah.
Exactly. And even for me, like staying in the same city, it's like there's a constant pull of like, okay, meet all these new people because a lot of people have flown in and they're in a new country, they're in a new city. But for me, all of my friends, no one
Yeah.
left. I
Yeah.
moved to 1 mile away onto campus, and then all these new people came into my day to day life. But a lot of my friends are still here. And then, like, the friends who did move, who went to school, it's like I am still staying in touch with them, like you.
Yeah.
And so I think that I'm like really realizing that there's tremendous value in not always trying to seize the opportunity to meet new people. Sometimes it's just best to pour into the people who God has put in your life already. So
Mm.
it's been nice to learn that. I'm like, okay, this feels like growth and growing up.
Yeah. And I guess on that point about, the people in your life who are pouring into you, like I want to go back and get how you looked at money growing up or like what your perspective
hmm
on it was, if you had any
Yeah,
thoughts about it. And also like if there were people that kind of informed that for you, kind of
definitely.
shaped that to where you are today.
Yeah, absolutely. So I would say growing up, my mom really like instilled in me not to worry about money.
Hmm.
It was very much like we will spend less money than we have and don't be concerned about it. Like it's not something to stress out about. It's not something to like really even think about too much. And so we lived a very modest lifestyle. I grew up in Detroit, Michigan. We would always spend the summers doing fun activities. And like now that I'm older, I realize like my mom would take us to all of the activities in the town, but all of them were like free activities. So I had like
Mm.
a great upbringing. I had a ton of fun meeting people in the local community. We would go to a bunch of library events. They would have all kinds of activities for kids. And so my brother and I would always be doing some activity at the library over
Yeah.
the summer with my mom. We would go to like parks. We would go to just like all kinds of events and programming that was designed for children and also free. And so we really leaned into experiences, which built great memories and also didn't cost any money. And then I would notice in school that like I would never have like the trendy or designer stuff when it came to
Mm.
school, but it also gave me a bit of a deeper understanding of like what truly matters. So there were times where I would feel really jealous of like, man, my friends all have Uggs and I don't, or like they have the latest silly
Yeah.
bands, if you can even believe that that was a thought in my mind as a kid. But I would just never have that kind of stuff. But it made it also more special on holidays or birthdays when we would get something special. Like we'd get like the silly band pack that we really wanted,
Yeah.
or I'd be able to go get like a little Vera Bradley wallet that like maybe it
Mm.
was at the secondhand store, but it was still really exciting to me to have it. It just gave me like more of a value on people and relationships and experiences. And then also an appreciation for like when you do get nice things, it's like cherishing them, but not breaking your whole bank just to like signal something to someone. Like that was never a part of
Yeah.
how I thought about money. And so as I got older, I became an earner. Like as I started working, which started, I would say, in like middle school, I started working. It gave me that
Mm.
same perspective on money of like spend less than you make, and also don't waste your money on things that are trying to signal something to someone else because that's a waste of your time and energy and effort. That really did me well when I got to college, when everyone was like spending a lot of their money on like designer things, trying to show off to their friends. And like I didn't
Mm.
really have that desire. I think that for me, it was much more around the actual value of things. So I realized like, okay, certain pieces of jewelry, if you buy the cheap version, it like turns green and then you have to throw it away and get something new.
Yeah.
And thinking about like the cost per use, if you spend a little bit more, like if you buy something that's like gold plated and maybe it costs you $100 versus $10, maybe you can wear it for 10 times longer. And so you're getting like the similar value. And so it started to shift my thinking towards like quality versus just having a brand name or trying to stick up
Mm.
with trends. And so that was something that really like kind of permeated into my years into college. The last thing I'll say about the experiences piece is it also has oriented me towards spending more money on experiences rather than things. So like I love to
Mm.
travel, I love to get on a plane. I'd much rather go get on a plane and go somewhere than have like a nice handbag. Like a
Yeah.
handbag that lots of people have the fake version of, like, what's even the point? I'm like, I might as well have a high quality handbag that's no name, like a no brand
Yeah.
bag, and a trip to somewhere interesting. Like I any
Yeah.
day will choose that experience. And so yeah, it's given me a very positive relationship with money. And I think that really started with my mom, who just instilled the value of other things besides just like chasing wealth and chasing money and chasing things. And so I think I really appreciate her for giving me that solid foundation on just like how to even approach and think about money.
Yeah. That's really interesting too, because I feel like I'm asking this because I think your upbringing like has a huge impact on how you view money, and it can go so many
Mhm.
different ways for people. So I think for me, like I definitely grew up and it was like, okay, we're not rich and like our parents are doing their best for us. And so there's always going
Mhm.
to be things that you want, especially as a kid. I don't even know
Yes.
what it is about like you seeing what other people have. That's why everyone has the same things. And
Exactly.
so it's like it's humbling in a sense when it's like, oh, this is something I really want. And your parents are like, no, you're not getting it.
Right.
And that's just it. And it's like, okay, I didn't die. Like I survived.
Yep.
But at the same time, like sometimes that kind of leads people to really desire to have money when they get older and have
Mhm.
that like hustler
Mhm.
mentality. And it's like, nothing else matters. Like I'm just gonna work super hard to like have as much as I want so that I can get whatever I want. Cause that's not
Right.
what I experienced growing up. But for you,
Mhm.
you kind of have this idea of it's a good thing, it's a resource, but it's not everything. Like it's not
100%.
yeah, it's not everything. And so you can prioritize what's most important to you in how you spend your money.
Yes, and I will say it is very difficult to maintain that perspective, especially in the environment I'm in right now. Living in Boston, I feel like our theme is how hard can we work, how busy can we be, how much money
Yeah.
can we make? That's like if I was going to give Boston a slogan.
Yeah.
And New York is very similar. And
Yeah.
so it's very tough to not be constantly optimizing for like how much money can I make? How can I put myself into the position of being maximized in my potential earnings?
Mm-hmm.
Because everyone around me is doing exactly that. Right now, I'm in business school, and everyone around me is like, okay, what jobs can I get that will earn me the most money
Yeah.
possible in the
Yeah.
world? And so thinking about, okay, am I going to follow the pack and optimize for money? Or am I going to like really stick firm to what I think is right for me, which is optimizing for the best experience? And by best experience, I mean like in my job, in what I'm doing, in what I love to do, which might not put me on the path to be like the next billionaire necessarily, but is going to
Yeah.
lend itself to like a really great lifestyle surrounded by people I love, surrounded by, activities that are enjoyable, surrounded by the time and energy and the lack of busyness to actually enjoy what life
Mm.
holds.
Mm-hmm.
That is a tough frame of mind to keep in the midst of everyone else swimming in the opposite direction of
Yeah.
how can we maximize our money. And so I've been really intentional about trying to remind myself, like, hey, you came into this experience wanting to find something that was enjoyable, since if we're going to spend most of our life at work, I might as well do something enjoyable. And
Yeah.
so, Jadyn, you got to keep doing that. Like, that is what you signed up for. That's what you're trying to do. And just reminding myself of that is hard because now I'm further away from the influences I had. Like, my mom doesn't live in Boston, she's in Michigan still.
Yeah.
And so I don't have that reminder all the time of remember your roots, remember like how you've been thinking about money and how it's worked for you thus far. So it's something I have to really work at staying true to, especially in the midst of constant marketing, constant reminders of you don't have this, you should get this. Like you open any social media and it's an advertisement for all the things you don't have. And that is really tough to combat.
Yeah, I could totally relate to feeling like there's just like a current of everyone around you going in one direction and you're like,
Hmm.
that's not necessarily the direction I want to go in. I think it's like very similar with law school. And like you said, just like being in New York and like what
Right.
opportunities are available. And it really is like a values thing. Like, okay, what are my personal values? What do I
Hmm.
want? Not what everyone else wants and what everyone else says I should want, but like, what do I actually
Right.
want? And how do I like pursue that?
Exactly. It's
So
tough.
I know it gets harder every day.
Hmm.
So, how did you or like when did you get into personal finance
Hmm.
and like become like well educated on it to a point where you could tell other people about it and like share what you've learned?
Yeah, so I was originally interested in personal finance when, again, this goes back to my mom. She decided to host this Financial Peace University course with Dave
Oh, okay.
Ramsey's
Hmm.
materials at our house. And I had to have been like 10 years old or something. And I was like, Mom, I want to join too. I want to learn about money too. And she was like, No, sweetie, you need to play outside with your brother and the neighborhood kids. And so I was like so bummed that I could not like learn about this. It just, I don't know why, but it intrigued me so much.
Wow.
And so when I got to college, I actually signed up for Financial Peace University and took the course with my at the time boyfriend, Will, who is now my husband. And I just found it extremely fascinating. Like all of the different things that I was learning in that course were interesting to me. And what else was interesting was there were some concepts that I was like very confused how it logically made sense. So, for background, Dave Ramsey's big thing is about not using any credit, no credit cards. He's like, you don't need a
Mm,
credit score. You can buy your house in cash. Why would you need a credit score? Why would you want to like be slave to the lender? Blah, blah, blah.
yeah.
And I, at the time when I took the course in college, was like, that doesn't really seem right to me because I knew enough to know that like you need a good credit score in order to borrow money for student loans,
Yeah.
for mortgage to get a house,
Yeah.
for car loans, to get an apartment. They run your credit at managed buildings and certain jobs as well. And so I was really confused like, how can you suggest to people that they don't need a credit score at all? And so that launched my personal research into personal finance. I was just like, this doesn't seem right to me. I am
Hmm.
dying to know like this is a very prolific person in the finance world, in the personal finance world. And so what he's saying, like if it doesn't seem right to me, I got to do some more research because certainly I'm not like, what do I know? That's what I was kind of thinking. I just must be missing something. And as I did more and more research, I was like, no, I think he's missing something actually.
Ooh.
And so I really just like learned and sought out resources. Some of my favorite resources were like NerdWallet, Investopedia, which are great ways to just like learn about personal finance in a very approachable way. And as I started having conversations with friends about all the things I was learning, people started encouraging me to put this information, this content online. And I'm like, no,
Mm,
that's like silly. Like, I've never been like a creator. I've always loved the idea of making content, and I'm like a creative person, but it was kind of scary to like think of putting myself out there, especially about a topic that I
yeah.
felt like I was a novice on, even though I had spent hours of research. It still felt pretty early on for me in my personal finance knowledge. However, I kept hearing this feedback. And so then I was like, all right, let me just start posting a little bit of the little nuggets that I'm learning. And as I did that, I also started just trying out different processes, different ideas of things that I was learning. So, for example, I was like, oh, I've heard about these high yield savings accounts. What
Hmm.
is it like in practice? And so, like, I opened a high yield savings account. I will never forget when I got my first interest payment. I was like, oh my goodness. I just got a check basically of my money working for me. Like, I could
Yeah.
not believe it. I will never forget in high school math, we learned about compounding interest. And I was like, wait, so you're telling me that you like make money on the money that you've already made and on the money that you made previously? I was like, what? This is it. This is unlocking the key. And
Yeah.
so I was so excited about that concept. And then to see it in practice when my money that I put in my bank account made money, I just was like jaw on the floor, so excited. And I was like, dang, this is a life hack.
Yeah.
And so I just had to go share it with everybody. I'm like, you guys don't even understand. Like, your cash money can be working for you. And so that built my excitement. And then, like, learning more about things like how when I spend money on a credit card, I could get cash back. I'm like, wait, so just by spending the money I was already going to spend, I can make more money? Like, it
Mm.
just seemed like such an interesting concept of how to be financially savvy in ways that are like not risky and don't involve like you making a personal investment into some
Hmm.
random scammy sounding thing.
Yeah.
I was like, this is very interesting to me. So I I also wanted to make sure that I was being responsible because I think we've all seen Confessions of a Shopaholic, and that was originally where I was scared into like not using credit cards. I'm like, I don't want to be in debt like that girl.
Yeah.
But I realized, okay, if I pay off all of these cards on time in full every month, then I'm never paying 1 cent of interest. And that was just like, again, I feel like I was just like finding the keys to the kingdom of personal finance. And so again, I had to go out and share it with the world. But yeah, those are kind of the origins of how I got interested in learning about personal finance at all.
Wow. Shout out to Dave Ramsey.
Right. And now to teach people to unlearn some of the
to,
things that he's
to
taught them.
not follow him. No, because it's like, I don't know. On one hand, I'm like, why don't they teach us this in school? Literally, it's like
Hmm.
basic things you need to know to survive as an adult.
Right. Right.
And no one thinks that this is some information that everyone needs to know.
They're like mitochondria for sure. Teach that. Personal finance
Exactly.
taxes, nah, they'll figure it
No,
out.
like literally, like basic things. So just the fact that you going out and learning all these things on your own, people are like, "Wait, can you tell me?" Because we all want the information. We all want to know
Hmm.
how it works, but we're just not aware of it
Exactly.
because it's like money is a resource, and when you're young, you don't really like have a lot of money, but you have a lot of time and you want to do
Exactly.
things. Versus as you get older, you like have less time but more money. So that
Hmm.
was always so interesting to me. Okay, so you started posting, you made a
Yep,
TikTok.
I
Get into
did.
that because it's
Hmm.
amazing.
Yeah, so I started my little TikTok. It's called Jadyn Finance. And I started just posting like things that brought me joy. So I would, like I said, I was getting really excited about like these high yield savings accounts. I was really excited about like cashback credit cards that had no fees. I was really excited about teaching people some of the basic terms that once I learned them, I felt like, wow, this is such a barrier to entry. Like it seems like this is so complicated, but actually it's super simple. So I would just like tell people like, for example, APR, what is that? Annual percentage rate. That is a term that is thrown around on any credit card application, but nobody ever like really digs into what does that mean. And so breaking down concepts so that they were super simple so that a high schooler, a middle schooler could understand them, that was what I was excited about doing. And then I would also love to like hop on trends, do the fun dances,
Mm-hmm.
and then talk about personal finance either in the caption or like on screen text. And so people were like having an enjoyable experience while also learning something. I felt like that was just
Yeah.
like the perfect combination. The reason a lot of people don't have financial literacy is because it's hard to sit down at your computer and be like, let me go do some personal finance research now. Like, no, a majority of people are not doing
No.
that. A super majority of people are not doing that. And so, since that was something I enjoyed doing, I was happy to do the research and then disseminate it in a more approachable style. And it ended up being a huge hit. There were a lot of organizations that reached out to me and were like, hey, like what you're saying is spot on and it's approachable and understandable. Can you come help us share what we're talking about? And that was really exciting. It really reinforced to me that I was filling a need in the
Mm-hmm.
community of TikTok and social media where people were coming for enjoyment, but leaving learning something. And
Yeah.
so that really kept me excited and engaged about the concept of posting this stuff because it was just resonating with people and I was getting instant feedback. It can be hard to do something where you're not getting instant feedback, but with this world, like the world of TikTok, you get instant feedback. You get
Yeah.
comments, you get views, people are engaged. And I started to feel like I got to know the audience and the community because I would see some of the same people in the comments asking questions and like
Hmm.
it was amazing, like getting DMs like, hey, like I'm thinking about this, like, but I don't know how I should be thinking about this. Does this seem like a good idea? Is this, have you heard of this company? They're offering these services, but I'm scared that's a scam. Like being able to help people do their research and teach them how to do that research, where to look was really exciting to me. And so I got a lot of joy out of building that community.
Yeah. And it's like you're definitely filling a void, especially for people that are younger, that are on TikTok. Like we're getting so much information on
Hmm.
there. And some of it, like you don't even know if it's true or not. But I think by
Exactly.
virtue of someone posting something, you just assume they have some sort of authority over the topic. So the fact that you're like
100%.
posting about things that you've tried yourself, that you've learned, that you've spent time learning, and you've like seen the positive results, and it's not like a scam or like 'cause
Mhm. Right.
there's so many things.
Exactly.
And I even know, like you were saying, people don't want to learn it by themselves because I can tell you how many things that I said I was gonna learn. Like how many books did I think about getting? I have a book that like about budgeting that is just like staring at me forever, and I will
Right.
never finish
It's
it.
on the shelf. Yep.
Literally, like so many podcasts, like so many things, and we just like never do it. So yeah, how have you been able to like prioritize your financial wellness in
Mhm.
your 20s? Especially like when things are volatile, like you're back in school now.
Mhm.
When you first graduate, you get your first job, you're like, "Oh, now I
Yeah.
make all this money. What do I do with it?"
Right.
You
It's
know?
very tempting to go buy some stuff when you're like,
Yeah.
"Okay, this money is hitting. It's hitting the bank account. It's looking good."
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that a part of my success in like thinking about money at all instead of being like, I'll think about it later, was that I got really into the TikTok before I graduated. And so before the money was like hitting my bank account that type of way, I was like already
Mm.
setting up ideas about how to budget this out and prepare myself. And so I think for women and just people in general who are like young and going into the workforce, before you ever spend your first dollar, it's nice to get those guardrails in place and think about like the ways that you are going to set yourself up for success, because the hardest thing I find to do is to start living a lifestyle and then like roll it back. So
Mm.
after you have like bought your car out of school, you buy like the most expensive one that you can afford, and then you go get an apartment that has like insanely high rent in like a main city, and then you like have your nail person who costs $100 at a time,
Oh my
and then
gosh.
you have like your hairstylist, and then you're like, okay, here are the different online stores that I like, and now I'm seeing them on my Instagram feed, and now I'm buying stuff. Like, it is very
Yeah.
hard to roll back that very expensive lifestyle. Maybe your like classic go-to hang with your friends is going out to like these expensive restaurants and getting drinks, and it's $100 every time you walk out the door. That's a hard lifestyle to roll back. So getting an idea of like where your finances are going to be and like having a plan before you ever get into the situation is ideal. However, when you think about like reality, a lot of people kind of miss that opportunity.
Mhm.
And so when they are, you know, a year, 2 years, 5 years out of school and they're already finding themselves like not able to save, not able to invest, having a hard time getting back to like a budget, something that I think is really useful is to take like a personal audit. So basically, take 1 month or 2 months back in your finances and go through every dollar that you spent. Literally pull out your credit card statements and line by line go into your Google Sheets, your Excel, and write down what was it that you were spending that money on. So it's like
Yeah.
maybe you're in your mind thinking, oh, I'm spending probably like what, $100 a month on Uber Eats. You might open up your credit card and see that you're spending like $400 a month on Uber Eats. And
Yeah.
it's like, do you want to be spending your money on that? Maybe not. So just having for a starting point, what have you been spending your money on historically is a great point. There have been times like after I graduated, I'm now about 3, almost 4 years out of school, where I like just was like, I don't really feel like budgeting anymore. And then at the end of those couple months, my credit card is statements have been really high and like I pay
Yeah.
them down every month, but that means that I'm draining my savings. And so in those moments, I do the same thing to get back on board with a budget and like making sure that I'm spending money where I want to spend money. I will just take an audit of like, what have I been spending my money on? And like, if I find that, wow, the restaurant budget, like how much money I've been spending on restaurants is like $1,000 for
Yeah.
like this month, that's not where I want to be spending my money. I'd rather spend that maybe like 700 of those dollars taking a trip somewhere. And so
Yeah.
like thinking to yourself, what are the values? What are the things that you have as big goals? And then how can I like set boundaries and budgets for myself so that I can achieve my own goals, not make it feel like I'm like not able to do fun stuff, but like realizing that if I'm making the decision that I want to do less restaurant stuff, like instead of going to a restaurant, maybe I have the girls over for a wine night at my place, which is like much cheaper than going out.
Yeah.
That's going to give me the ability and flexibility to then take the trip that I want to take because I'll have been able to save without having these expenses sneak up on me. And so I think that's a very good entry point into learning about your finances and starting to have a budget is to just like take stock of where you're spending your money. It seems like kind of daunting to like set a budget and move forward with it because you don't really know. So I think it's impossible to just start by like being like, okay, I'm going to spend $50 on groceries. Like that's not realistic. You need to
Yeah.
know where you were spending already in order to know how to flex your budget and how to set yourself up for success moving forward. So that's how I would suggest anyone to get started is to take their personal audit.
Yeah, I think that is such great advice because I know there have been times where I was like, in my head, I was like, okay, the budget is don't spend money. And then, like,
Right. And then you just feel like bad and guilty every time you walk out of the
yes,
house.
you always feel bad. You're like, the budget is spend like the least amount possible, which doesn't make sense. And then, like, you think you're not
Exactly.
spending that much. And then when you finally go back and you like run through the numbers, you're like, oh my
Mhm.
gosh, like, what was I thinking?
Exactly. Especially when you're in school. Like I'm in school now and I'm like, I've thought the same thing. Like I'll just not spend any money. And then every time you go to like eat lunch, you're like, oh crap, like I wasn't supposed to spend this money. Like now you feel bad, which you shouldn't have felt bad. You should have set
Yeah.
the money aside, speaking to myself. And so
Yeah.
it's like having a budget that's realistic and reasonable. It allows you to have peace, honestly. Going back to, Financial Peace University, I do understand why it's named that. You have a certain level of
Yeah.
peace when your finances are in order, when your budget is realistic, when you don't feel like you're starting out behind. And so
Yeah.
that's why it's super important to like understand where are you overspending and then like where can you thoughtfully reduce your costs in ways that don't make you feel like your life is awful because it's like a
Mm.
diet, like a food diet. If you're like I'm never going to eat any dessert ever again. Surely days from now, whether it's a
Yeah.
week or a month, you're going to be like I'm just going to binge eat all of this food because I haven't been enjoying my life. And so it's like typically when you want to make a food diet, you want to make sure that it's sustainable and it's about moderation. Same thing with a
Yeah.
budget. You can't just be like, I'm never going to spend any money because then one day you're going to snap and spend like $1,000
Yeah.
on some random thing. Like maybe you're like, oh, I'm just going to get the handbag. I'm just going to get the jewelry. And it's like, that is not going to be good for your long term goals. So you might as well have just worked in some things that bring you joy. Like if $5 Starbucks brings you joy, then like work that into your budget. And maybe you, instead of going every day, maybe you're like making coffee at home for 5 days of the week.
Mhm.
And maybe on the weekends, you're going to get your $5 Starbucks with your friends. So you turn it into like beyond just like a solo event. It's like two birds, one stone. You're getting to spend time with your friends as well as be able to drink a drink that brings you joy. So those are some of the strategies and ways that I try to think about making decisions that can be long term that are not just going to like fall apart 10 days in.
Yeah, that's so true. Okay, so what do you say to people? Because I feel like I have friends, and sometimes I fall into this mentality that's like, oh, but I'm still young. So like, is it really that deep? Like,
Mhm.
let's just pretend all the financial decisions I have made up until now, like, they just didn't happen. Like, let's just forget about them. And like, maybe in like a few years when,
Right.
I need to actually be responsible, then I'll like actually get it together. But right now, like, as long as, I'm not in debt,
Mhm.
it's fine. What do you say
Yeah.
to that?
I think that that is a very difficult thought pattern to get out of. So if you think, oh, like in the future, I will start taking this seriously, the future will never come. And when you are wanting to retire, you'll be like, why didn't I start thinking about this sooner? And you'll be kicking yourself. And so, like, a finance concept is the time value of money. And basically, it
Mm-hmm.
means that your money today, if you invest it, is obviously going to be worth more later, is now necessarily. And so if you invest $1 today, that is going to be worth much more than if you have one single dollar, that same dollar. Like if you were to put it, bury it in your backyard and pull that $1 out in 20 years, that $1 is worth less. You're going to be able to buy less with that. And if you were to invest $1 today and then go see where that investment lands 20 years from now.
Mm-hmm.
And so by not investing your money now, by spending it instead of investing any of it, you are doing yourself a huge disservice. You're losing out on potentially millions of dollars. Sounds very dramatic, but genuinely,
Mm-hmm.
the money that you put in now, if you were to pull it out when you're ready to retire, so like we're in our 20s, that means if you wanted to retire at the typical age of 65, that's like 40 years from now. And
Yeah.
so the amount of value that you will be able to retire with if you start investing now is so significant that you're not going to have to work until the day that you die. I think people are really forgetting to think about their own future self, especially as we're starting to have advances in science that are allowing people to live longer. You don't want to set yourself up for that type of failure where you are having to work in order to have a roof over your head and food
Mm.
in your mouth. And so I think it's extremely important to start making sure that you're setting your future self up for success. That doesn't have to be like you're setting aside 100% of your income, you're doing nothing fun, you're just like saving for the future. That could be something like you're putting 6% of your income into a 401k that your employer matches. That can look like you are investing even like 1 or 2% of your income every paycheck or every year into something like the S&P 500, which is a very typical investment that if you go on to like Robinhood or if you go on Google and look up S&P 500, you will see that the value of that has gone up in its lifetime just in general. And so if you were thinking about short term, like how can I make my $1 worth a bunch of money in 10
Mm-hmm.
days? That's not going to be what these types of investment vehicles are looking to do. These are investments that
Yeah.
have a past history of increasing in value over time, long amounts of
Yeah.
time. And so I think that it's really easy to be like, oh, surely if I keep this $100 a week and spend it now, I'm going to feel better and like have more now. But
Yeah.
that same $100 a week, if you were to invest it and then be able to use it for retirement, will just have so much more value in the future. And not just like physical value, but like your lifestyle value of not
Yeah.
having to work as a 65, 70, 80-year-old person. So I would say take a long, hard look at what do you want your future self to be thinking. And like it can be hard to have that delayed gratification. But I would be so devastated to like get to a point where I'm like, man, I want to spend time with my grandkids. I want to like relax and not be on the grind every day. And I can't do it because I wasn't thinking about this back in the day. Like that is devastating. And there's never going to be a point where you're like, okay,
Mm.
now is when I'm going to start thinking about my future. Because if you do that, by the time you get started, it's going to be too late. And the
Yeah.
greatest asset that you have when you're young is time. And so that time converts into money later on, but it doesn't convert if you don't start saving and investing. So it's important to start it like today.
Yeah. Obviously, I think when you're young, you just want like instant gratification, and your things are
Hmm.
just so short-sighted because you really can't see that far ahead. But I think even like to say, okay, when you start having kids, that's not 40 years out.
Right.
and you don't want to be scrambling to figure out your finances once it's too late, kind of like what you were saying. Like
Exactly.
once you suddenly have way more expenses, you don't want to finally be trying to figure out how to save. And so I do think it really is
Mhm.
just like even building the muscle now,
Yep, exactly.
especially when you're in school. I think it can be easy to be like, oh, but I don't even like really have income necessarily. Like this is financial
Mhm.
aid. So like it doesn't really matter. But I was even thinking about it in the sense of like, okay, 3 years from now, I'm gonna graduate and everyone takes a bar trip, which is like when you take the bar exam and you
Mhm.
hopefully pass, you like go on a like nice trip, you go on a nice
Yeah.
international trip. And I was like, dang, maybe I should start saving for that now. Like if I just put
Yep.
away like $30 a month,
Mhm.
by then I'll have saved so much and then I can really like take a nice trip. And so like even building that muscle now in that small thing can help you later on when you have to save for like your child's college fund and like other things like that.
Exactly. Absolutely. And so, like, even thinking about being smart logistically with those types of savings. So, with that type of situation where you're setting aside a certain amount of money for a future expense that's not like a typical budget item. So, it's not like you're putting aside $30 for like Netflix and Spotify. It's setting money aside for a
Mhm.
trip that's in the future. That's called a sinking fund in your budget. So, it's like if you were to continue for the rest of the next 10 years, setting aside $30 a month for a travel sinking fund, basically as you use the money, it obviously drains that fund, but then you're continuing to pour into it, but it's not coming on like specific intervals of when you're taking the money out. And so that is a great habit to build while you're in school so that when you leave school, you're not like, okay, let me budget out to spend every single dollar I make and I'm not going to save anything. Another good practice for saving that type of money is to make sure you're putting it into a high yield savings account because a traditional savings account,
Mhm.
sometimes you'll get something as low as like 0.01% interest on that. And so you can save the same money in a high yield savings account. And these days you're seeing anywhere between 4, 5, 6% in APY, which is annual percentage yield on these accounts. And so you might as well let your money grow and work for you, as I talked about earlier, instead of putting it into
Mm.
like a jar on your counter where the money is literally losing value as it sits there. Because of inflation, because of the way that money
Yeah.
loses value over time.
Yeah. I think we all learned about inflation this past year,
For
like,
sure,
if
for
you
sure.
didn't
If you
know.
didn't know now, if you
If
didn't know, now you
you now
know.
you know. No, but that is great advice, and I think it even just helps me to because I know for the longest time I was like, "Okay, how do I freaking make a budget?" I was like, "What's a budget?" And I would just, like, spend so
Right.
much time thinking about the concept of a budget, I would never make one. It's like it's just planning, right? It's just, like,
Yep.
planning how I'm going to use what's coming in so that at
Yep.
the end of the day, I don't turn around and I'm in a deficit because
Exactly.
it's, like, way easier than you think, and even on the point you were talking about lifestyle creep earlier, which is so real,
Mhm.
and it's kinda crazy because people, like, especially if you just go straight through, like, grad school, you can graduate making, like, 6 figures and have never known how to
Budget.
save
Yeah.
that.
No, 100%. I know a lot of people who like live literal paycheck to paycheck who make a lot more money than I ever even knew how to count to back when I was a child. And I'm like, wow, that's insane that these people are living paycheck to paycheck. But it's not even like, it's not people who don't have financial literacy. It's not people who don't have college educations. It's like the people who are most educated in America living paycheck to paycheck. And so it's very unfortunate that as a society, we've just kind of let financial literacy slide as something that we don't see value in learning. And it's so important from the person
Yeah.
who's making, $1,000 a month to the person who's making $10,000 a month, everything in between and beyond. I think that it's super
Yeah.
important to like make sure that you understand where your money's going because if you don't check where your money's going, it's going to leave you and you're not going to know what happened and you're not going to be able to get it back. So it's so
Yeah.
important.
That's so true. I feel like especially when I was working, God was kind of challenging me in that area of just like stewarding what you have
Mhm.
because you never know what the next year holds for you. Like you never know if you like
100%.
lose your job, if something changes in
Yep.
your life, like you just never know. And especially if you have goals or like ways you want to use your money, if you know where it's going, then you don't have to feel guilty. Like if you know you want to be generous in a certain way, then just like plan for
Mhm.
that and then you can.
Yep.
And it's not something you have to think twice about. Just like with any other resource, like just how we care about our time and like how are we spending our time, what's taking up all of our time, the people that we're seeing,
Yes.
things like that. It's just the same thing. And so, yeah, I do really think it's a good muscle to start building.
Absolutely, absolutely. And it's definitely never too early, but it's also never too late. I think sometimes people feel
Yeah.
like, well, I'm already in debt. I already can't do this. It's too hard. That is so not the case. Like there's always an opportunity to start now and like
Yeah.
improve. It really feels so similar to like your physical fitness and your physical well-being, like with money and finances. You can always improve, you can always get better, you can always get started. And so
Mm.
I think if you have that mindset of like, it is not necessarily like a linear path for everybody, there might be setbacks, but the whole goal is over time improving your financial standing, your financial literacy, and learning so that you can not only improve your own situation, but help the people around you to also be in a good financial spot because it's not the kind of situation where it's like you just want to be financially amazing on your own. Like you want to bring up
Mm.
the people around you as well because
Yeah.
if your friends can't afford to go to the thing you want to go to, you're going to go by yourself anyway. So like that doesn't sound fun to me. I would rather like
Yeah.
everybody is getting on their gains.
Yeah.
So,
No, that's so true. Because it's like this knowledge, someone has it, but it's maybe,
mhm,
the top X percent of people that know it and they can pass that
right,
on. And so it's like once you learn it, like sharing that as well. That's so good.
exactly.
So, how do you feel like your ideas about personal finance have changed since you got married, since becoming a parent, if at
hmm
all? How has your outlook on that changed?
Um, let's see. I would say getting married, it makes you really have to reflect on how you spend your money because now it's not just like your own life that you're spending
Hmm.
money. It's like you're affecting somebody else's life as well, and vice versa. I think that it made me have to be more thoughtful about where I would spend money because I alluded to it before, but like because I grew up thinking, okay, I'll just spend less money than I make. That's what I did for a very long time. And then when I got married, I was like, oh, I actually should budget because I want to be accountable to myself and to my husband about like, where am I spending money? Where is this going? Like,
Yeah.
and what are our common goals of what we want to allocate money for in the future? And so things like planning to save up for our wedding celebration because we got married during COVID, so our wedding got canceled. So we're like, okay, well, let's save money
Hmm.
in the future for a big party. And that was something where it's like, we really have to plan ahead for that.
Yeah.
We also wanted to plan for the expenses of having kids. And so that was kind of an unknown expense, but I just was like, I want to be saving money in general and having some allocation for that. And so it made me sharper with like how I thought about logistically spending money and tracking my spending and being able to say, okay, like here's actually where things went versus, oh yeah, well, I definitely spent less than I made. So like we're good. It
Yeah.
just became a little bit more complicated, but in a good way. I think that it's good to have that accountability partner built in. I know some people who decide to let one of the people in the marriage do all of the finances by themselves. And I think that that's an extremely bad idea because
Mm.
it allows for one person to not know anything about what's going on. They're surrendering their choice, which you might think, oh, that's
Hmm.
a great thing for the other person. But it's actually not because when decisions have to be made, when hard times come, when we have to decide, are we going to pay for this or pay for this? And prioritizing things, it puts a lot of stress and responsibility on one person, which is not what I feel like marriage is about. It's about a partnership. And so, like, of course,
Yeah.
you might have someone who leads the finances, and that can be the man or the woman. Like, I think it's important to lean into your strengths. Like, in my household, it's a Christian home. And so, like, I see my husband as the leader of the household, but he knows that I love personal finance. And so he's like, that's something that you love to lead. Feel free,
Hmm.
which I think is a really appropriate and great way to be in a marriage. And so for me, I don't want to like make all the decisions myself, but I do like being able to be like, okay, here's the dashboard. Here's how I'm thinking about how we should spend the money and how we should save and what we should invest in. And I think that that really sets you up for success because it's not like I'm like, oh man, like things are not looking good. If our rent went up by 2x, which it did when we moved across the river, it's not like I'm like, okay, I think I'm going to cut out groceries and now we're going to spend $100
Yeah.
a month on groceries somehow, but I'm not going to tell Will because he'll figure it out later. Like that is just
Yeah.
a huge setup for failure. That's not going to work. And if for some reason we were to not be able to pull the grocery budget down to $100, which is unreasonable, suddenly we might be operating at a deficit and now our savings are going down. And in the case where I don't share that information, one day we all find ourselves in a bad situation and the other person looks up and they're like, how did we get here? And it's like by removing
Yeah.
yourself from the responsibility of being collaborative, you set yourself up for success as well as the spouse who was not paying attention or caring about the finances. So I think it's really important to have those like budgeting conversations. Maybe it's once a month where it's like, let's come together and talk about what are the main things that we want to focus on this month. What are the ways that we're thinking about spending? What categories do we need to adjust? That is really important. And so that's a big way that things changed for me when I got married, was just like the thought that I actually genuinely put into my budget and how I approach spending money. And then something else we had to plan for was like Will and I knew I was going to go back to school. And so we really leaned into this idea of like, we started off where we were on one income for two of us because I was already in school. Then we were dual income, no kids, or DINKs. I love that term, which was amazing. So fun. We had so much money. But we had to make sure that we spent just one income because I wanted to make
Okay.
sure we didn't have the lifestyle creep of now we have two incomes. Let's spend two incomes worth. And then when I go back to
Yeah.
school, we're suddenly on one income again. Like that's a setup for failure again. So we wanted to make sure that
Yeah.
we spent just one income. So that's how we were able to save very quickly for the wedding celebration. We were also able to have money when we had our child. And that
Yeah.
was a good lifestyle to set up so that now that I am back in school and we are back on one income, we're able to not feel like we're taking a huge hit on all sides
Mm.
to our spending. So yeah, there are definitely ways that you can set yourself up for future success, but it takes more intentionality. It takes having the hard conversations, doing a little bit more work than maybe you want to do around personal finances, especially for the person who might not care as much, which
Yeah.
oftentimes is the woman. And so
Yeah.
I'm all about encouraging women specifically to be involved in the finances, like learn more about it. And that's why I love teaching people about it because it's like, I don't want you to fall into that trap of, well, I had no idea that our house is getting foreclosed on and I had no idea how we got here. That's a dramatic example, but it unfortunately happens all the time.
Yeah. Wow. No, that is such great advice. Because it's like the reality, I think, isn't it like a lot of marriages end because of finances or like people don't
Yeah,
want to talk
that's one
about
of the
it.
top three reasons.
Yeah, people don't want to talk about it. It can be so contentious and it's like why does it have to be? Right? If we just started
Exactly.
out being like open and transparent about it. And like you were saying like it takes discipline, but when you already come in with some basic knowledge because I think like you're saying
Mhm.
a lot of women it's just like, "Oh, like, he'll figure it out, like, hopefully he's
Mhm.
good at it." And, like, I fall into that sometimes too, like, "You need to be better at finances than me because we both can't be like this." But
Right.
the reality is it's on both of you, right,
Exactly.
to make it successful.
100%. And so I think that going into it with that mindset of like, we're both going to at least have a baseline level of financial literacy about this, and we're both going to check in on some type of interval is imperative to having success in this arena of your marriage. And sometimes you have different styles or thoughts around money. Will and I came into our marriage with completely different thoughts about money. His family
Mm,
had more money than my family ever had growing up, but they were
mm,
very much stressed and frugal. And so his thoughts when it came to money was like, we need to save, we can't spend, like money is hard to come by. And if you just hold on to it, you'll have more of it, which is again
yeah.
the exact opposite of how I thought about money. And since I had less, there was like less to lose in a way. And
Hmm,
so I felt like I was also able to be more generous with my money and just how I thought about it. And so both of us learned a little something. Like I learned, okay, maybe I don't need to like be spending my money in these different ways that I like to spend it. Like I'm big on spending for convenience. And he was like, that's unnecessary. And so I was like, okay, yeah, that's something that I can learn. There are savings to be had when you take out some of the convenience. That's a trade off that you can make. And on the
mhm,
other hand, he learned, oh, maybe it is worthwhile to spend a little bit of money on experiences while we're young and have our health versus just saying, oh, we'll save up and spend money in 40 years when we're retired. There has been a
yeah.
trade-off and we've both come to more of a middle ground. And that's honestly a huge blessing of marriage is being able to hear somebody else's perspective and learn and grow in an area that you might have felt like you knew what you were doing and you had the best way, but there are multiple ways to have a positive outcome. So that's something else that I learned and had to change a little bit when I got married when it came to money.
Yeah. That just reminded me of the reality of being in school and, like, going into debt and stuff is, like, remembering that when you do get married, like, that's what's
Yep,
mine is yours. So like,
exactly.
so also,
Yep,
you know, just being able to have a plan and like speak knowledgeably about that because like it's something
100%.
that you're gonna have to face. So yeah.
Yeah, and honestly, if we wanna talk about debt and things, that's something you should talk about sooner than later when you're dating, because you do need to get an understanding of the person's like, how they think about finances. Because if you're going into marriage with somebody who's, like, just genuinely financially irresponsible, like, perhaps they have 100 grand, this is, again, just an example, 100 grand in credit
Mm-hmm.
card debt, and maybe they have, like, 200 grand in student loans, and they also have,
Mm-hmm.
like, a $50,000 car loan, and they also have like a $30,000 personal loan. Those indicators to me, like just those numbers alone, and I could totally believe those numbers, especially in a city like Boston or New York, that is a red flag. And so, like, you want to
Yeah.
make sure that you're working, not working, but like there's a partnership. You want to make sure that the person that you're going to join your whole life with has a financial literacy that you feel okay with. If
Yeah.
you're okay, like going into that type of helping them get out of it, or even understanding like that this is something that they need to like navigate and grow, that's just like a good thing to know early on. Will and
Yeah.
I, like I said, we did Financial Peace University together while we were dating. So that in and of itself got us on the same page. And we
Hmm.
were able to have those conversations before we ever got engaged or married. And some people put that conversation off, but I honestly think that like that's an appropriate conversation for like the earlier half of a dating relationship. If you're
Yeah.
thinking about like the timeline of like dating to thinking about getting engaged to getting engaged to getting married, like I think that that happens in the thinking about getting engaged category where you're like, all right, before we think too long about this, let's consider our finances and how do we,
Yeah.
what are our spending habits? How are we thinking about money? Are we spenders or savers? What are our thoughts about investing? All of those are very important questions to ask before you put a ring on it, for
Yeah.
sure. So, Will and I were both people who came into the marriage with no debt at all. Praise God.
Yeah. It's
That's
amazing.
just like a huge blessing. And I think it's more and more rare. But he also knew that I was planning to go to business school, which is extremely expensive. So it's like we were both going to be aggregating some loans together through this experience. And so something that he wanted to do was start a startup, which meant that he was not going to have an income for an unknown amount of time. So there's been give and take on both sides,
Hmm.
and we've had to like really strategize and think about what are our priorities and when are we going to each give and take, in the sense of like I was working while he was doing his startup, and then now he's working while I'm in school, and so it's like
Yeah.
trying to make sure that we have some type of ability to make an income at any given time has been something that works well for us and is a big part of why we never spent both of our incomes when we both made an
Yeah.
income, because it's just not been our reality that we have two incomes in the last couple of years based on our situation. So once I'm done with school, we'll be back to two incomes. But again, you never know. Like he's an entrepreneur, so I'm sure he's going to have a moment where he's like, I want to do another startup, and that might take us down to one income again. And
Yeah.
so you really have to like start the conversations early and often, and then make a plan, make sure that you continue to like talk about that plan, see where people are at in just your marriage, just to make sure that you don't end up going on two separate paths and building resentment and not being on the same page,
Yeah.
which is easy to do. And which is why I think finances can be a point of contention
Yeah.
when it comes to marriage.
Yeah. No, that is such great advice. On that topic, is there a financial mistake you've made or like a financial regret that you have that you've learned from?
Hmm. Let's see. I've definitely made financial mistakes. I think that like the biggest one is that I didn't even know of a high yield savings account until maybe 2 or 3 years ago. Whenever I, like, heard about it and shared it on my TikTok was, like, real time when I learned about it, and I just, like, could not believe how many years just my money was withering away in value for no reason. That was, like,
Hmm.
an upsetting and also exciting to now know about it situation. So that's definitely one big mistake, because that has definitely cost me literally thousands of dollars over the years, if I'm being serious about, like, how much money I didn't make by leaving that money in an account that didn't make any money. And again, like 0.01%, so it's, like, literal pennies, if that.
Yeah.
So that was one. I let me think. I also think just like not having a better idea of where my money was going sooner, because I used that
Yeah.
method of spend less than I make all the way through college up until I got married. There's certainly lots of money that I probably didn't need to spend because like I was working while I was in college, and so I was making money, but like I definitely had no savings to show for that. And so it was kind of just like, oh well, I made money, now let me go spend that money, and then no worries. And so when I got to my first job, I like made sure to like start investing in my 401k immediately. My company did a match. And so that was like kind of
Mm-hmm.
a no-brainer. I contributed the same amount as the match, so I was getting the maximum amount into my 401k, which is a tax benefited retirement account.
Mm-hmm.
And so just like the process of all of that time, just like not having an idea of where my money went, I would have gone back and maybe done that differently. I would have taken that personal finance audit sooner and been able to think about like, okay, are there things that I want to like invest in? Are there long-term goals? I was just thinking, oh, I'm a college student. My long-term goal is to graduate. But I think I could have been a little bit more savvy with that. And so I don't know if I like going back would have done it if it was going to add any stress to my life, because I think that at least I wasn't like accruing more debt.
Mm-hmm.
And that was the whole point of me working, was to be able to have a little spending money. But I would have loved to know like, where did my money go? So those are probably the main two. Not having a high savings account and not having a budget sooner are the main mistakes that I've made.
Yeah. I can totally relate to the second one of just like not knowing where your money is going. I think, and I guess in that same vein, like regret not taking it more seriously earlier, because like
Yeah.
just building those skills and those practices. Because in college, it was like, oh, well, this is scholarship money, so I have to spend it. And
Hmm.
I didn't know what I was spending it on. I couldn't tell you. As long as there was still money in the account, I was just spending it.
Right.
So like no savings to show for it when I graduated.
Exactly.
And then you start working and you have the same spending mentality, because it's like,
Yep.
oh, and back then I thought a budget was just like keeping track of your money, in the sense that like, oh, I'm just going to put how much I'm spending for each category, but like I'm not going to
Right.
actually see if I'm spending more than I'm making, or if I'm like spending more than I
Right.
want to be spending. And it wasn't
Yep.
until like literally a year later I was like, let me go through these numbers and like see, and like each month it was like red, as in like I was taking out of my savings each month because I was spending more than I had planned to be spending, and
Yeah.
I was like, this is
Yep.
just crazy, and you don't even realize it. Yeah.
Exactly. Exactly. Then you
Deep
feel
regret.
annoyed because you're like, dang, I did not want to give my whole paycheck to Uber Eats. Like,
No,
what?
literally.
Just have food at the house spoil. And you're like, what? Suddenly I get it. I'm like, oh yeah, we do got food at the house. So anyway, that
Yeah.
is definitely something that I think is relatable to a lot of people. It's like, oh boy, how do we get back on track, or get on track at all for the first time with
Yeah.
deciding where your money goes instead of your money just going places? That's the biggest thing, is like just taking back control over where your money goes. How do you want to spend it versus like how are you just like happening to spend it?
Yeah. That's so true. And like maybe you've already said it, but what's the best piece of financial advice you've ever received?
Ooh, best piece of advice. This one is one that I had never expected this to be the advice, and it's not like in some eloquent, perfect package, but the concept that leverage is good is something that has really stuck
Hmm.
with me. And what I mean by that is we are really taught from the beginning, when I ever took that course that I mentioned before, it was like debt is bad, don't be in any type of debt, you don't want to do that. But what I've learned is that if you think about the time that you have in the day, 24 hours. If you were to work for, let's say, 8 of those hours, 15 of those hours, even 20 of those hours at an hourly rate, you will never be able to grow wealth in like a significant type of way. But if you are the next level up, so maybe you are managing people who are working those main hours. Like, let's think
Hmm.
about this in the sense of like the case of McDonald's. If you're an hourly worker at McDonald's, if you were to work every single hour of the week of shifts, 168 hours, and you're making, let's say, $10 an hour, the maximum amount of money you're making is going to be less than the manager above you, who maybe they're making like $15 an hour. So let's say you have that manager job and you're working every single hour of the week. 168 hours in the week. You're never going to make as much money as the owner above you who has all the managers and all the workers. And
Hmm.
maybe they're making $20 an hour, let's say. They're never going to make as much money as the person above them who owns the whole franchise. And that
Hmm.
person who owns the McDonald's name brand,
Hmm.
they have invested in the company. So they're equity owners. As all of these stores are making more money, all the people who are like working there as hourly workers, all the managers, all the store owners, they're all working at maybe an hourly rate. The person who owns equity in the store, as these stores get money, have customers, they are over here making an amount of money on the whole business without ever doing any of the work. They have not flipped one burger. They have not
Hmm.
managed one worker. They have not worried about the actual physical storefront because that's not their part of the business. They have leveraged themselves through that business. And so what they had to do in order to end up in that spot is invest money. And maybe it's money that they had, maybe it's money that they borrowed, but by investing, they are allowing themselves to make more money without having to physically be there doing the job. And I've realized there's much more value in allowing yourself to be levered. And so learning these concepts of arbitrage and how money works and how borrowers and lenders come together in this like, economic world, that was such an interesting concept to me that really made me want to dive deeper. And
Hmm.
so all of this is to say that not all debt is bad. And if you can think strategically about how to wisely lever yourself, maybe that's like buying a rental property and putting renters in it, and the rent pays you more than the mortgage costs. And then
Hmm.
you're taking that bit of value, capturing that bit of value. Again, it's not like you're working there day to day. You are like setting up a financial construction that allows for you to capture value without you taking your 168 hours and like trying to spend them all to make money. That concept I think has been a game changer for me. And I try to think about ways that I can move forward in the world and take advantage of that concept, because that is how the people who are doing very well are levering themselves. They're not working all these hours at McDonald's. They're like a
Hmm.
level above, a level above, a level above. And I think that that's accessible to people more so than they think. But the missing piece is the financial literacy. And then there's many other missing pieces depending on who you are and where you are. But I'm trying to help bridge the gap between step 0 to 1, which is like just having the financial literacy in the first place, breaking things down so that they're more approachable and understandable, and giving people the knowledge that they need to find these opportunities where they are.
Yeah. Wow. I can't even pretend to understand everything you said, but like, but I see where you're going, and
Yes.
that's why you're in business school. So,
Yep, yep.
like,
And a part of what I'm like trying to do is figure out how to break things down so that it's simpler and simpler so that people can try to break into this world of being able to earn more than just their hourly wage.
yeah. And that's the way you're kind of raised to think about it. It's just like, oh, get a better job and then
Yep,
like you'll be fine. Or now people are doing like the every 2 years or so they like
exactly.
transfer, or they get a different job that like pays
Hmm.
more and then they,
Then they spend more and then they need to
yeah,
go get more. Yes.
that's a completely different way to look at it, which is so
Yeah,
interesting.
absolutely. I guess to boil it all down, it's like investing is how you win the personal finance game. It can't just be saving. As
Yeah.
appealing as saving is and how safe it seems, of course, save an emergency fund. Make sure that if you do lose your job, you have access to your money in something like a bank account, but also make sure that you're investing, because long term, the money in your bank account is not going to grow the way you need it to so that it has value when you're ready to retire.
Yeah. Yeah. That's great advice. So, is there anything else that you wanted to share on this topic that you haven't gotten a chance to?
Hmm. Let's see. I would just encourage people to not be scared to start learning. It might be in little ways here or there. It might look like going on TikTok and following someone who teaches personal finance just to get little snippets of wisdom here and there. And I would say don't be afraid to ask questions. Now we have the benefit of AI tools that you can ask questions like there's not going to be any judgment, there's no dumb questions. And so I would
Mm.
really encourage people to like start asking questions, start being more curious and seeing like what don't I know and how can I like start to learn. If you have questions, ask them. If you don't have questions, start listening to different creators who have credibility, who can give you ideas about what to think about and ways to be savvy with your finances. Because at the end of the day, we all have finite resources. And so it's important to think about how are we stewarding those resources in a way that's wise, in a way that's going to be beneficial to ourselves and our families,
Mm-hmm.
because that's what it's all about at the end of the day.
Yeah, that's so true. Being curious is not a bad thing, especially with this. And it's okay if you don't know.
Exactly. I started off knowing nothing. I didn't know what I didn't know. That can be a hard place to be in, to be like, well, I don't know anything. I don't even know what questions to literally ask. And
Yeah.
so by like just starting to hear different perspectives and double click into what was interesting to me, I was able to really learn a lot of the essentials for financial literacy.
Yeah. And so how would you say things have changed for you now? Like what you're currently learning and like
Hmm.
your outlook and your approach to personal finance?
Yeah, I would say, hmm, I think I'm now realizing that all of the savviness in the world is great, but I still think that it's super important to optimize for like your enjoyment of your life, in the sense of like, it doesn't make sense to always be trying to chase that next dollar. It doesn't make sense to always be trying to hustle at the expense of your
Mm,
well-being in your life. Sometimes it's okay to like slow down and do the free thing. Go for the walk along the river, not always try to be going out and trying to make money and always hustling, in the sense of, if I'm sitting down and relaxing, I'm stressed that I'm not doing something. I
mm,
think I've really learned having the most money in the world is not the best thing in the world. Sometimes it's nice to
mm.
just like enjoy what you have, live within your means, and relax, and not always trying to be doing too much. And so that's something that I've learned and can really appreciate, because it can be really stressful to always be trying to optimize for the best strategy and all these things. Like that's not always necessary. Once you have the fundamentals and the basics down, you can rest assured in that the knowledge that you are doing the best with the resources that you have. And if you want to like get
Mm,
fancy with it and do all these extra things, you can, but that's not necessary. Like you don't need to be stressed.
mm.
I'm like, I'm not going to let money take my piece. And
Yeah.
so knowing when to do less is also really important. Knowing when to be like, all right, I've actually learned enough for this moment. Like, I'm not going to be stressed about it. I'm not
Yeah.
going to think about it. I really love my mom's approach of like, we weren't just always thinking about money. I don't want money to be always on my mind.
Yeah.
As much as I love talking about personal finance, I'm not always thinking about money. I am thinking about like, wow, what a nice day it is outside. I love
Yeah.
hanging out with my family. What a delicious meal I'm having. And by budgeting and making these decisions for yourself, you don't have to take as much time to think about money every time. I don't have to feel guilty when I
Mm,
go spend money on XYZ things, because I know that this is a part of the budget that I made for myself, and this is a part of the plan that I have. And so I don't have to think about it. And that freedom mentally is so valuable. So I would encourage people to take the time to set yourself up so that you don't have to think about money all the time, because there is such freedom in that. And it is a great feeling to know that the decision is made, like, I can afford this. And so I'm going to enjoy it. I think that's the best part about getting control of your finances.
yeah. And it sounds a lot like what you're saying is getting to the point where you can also be content. Because it's not like you're not thinking about money
Hmm.
because you're ignoring it. It's already been,
Yes.
settled to a point where
Yep.
you're like, I don't have to like continue striving. I feel like there's an endless amount of information to gain.
100%. There actually is an endless amount of information, and things are endlessly changing. Even the interest
Yeah.
rates are changing like week to week, month to month, it feels like. And so you're never going to know it all. You have to get to a point where you're like, okay, I feel comfortable with what I know. I feel comfortable with what I have, and I feel comfortable with the decisions that I'm making. And so now I'm just going to like enjoy my life within these means that I'm in.
Yeah.
And then that's that. There has to be a point where you're like, okay, now I'm good. And there have been so many studies on like the marginal amount of more money you can make and
Hmm.
its contribution to your happiness. There is like a ceiling where there are diminishing returns, meaning
Yeah.
that as you make more money, you're not necessarily going to be happier or feel better or like be pleased with yourself. So like when you get to the point where you're like, all right, I feel comfortable, it's okay to just be comfortable and enjoy life and not continuously try to make the extra buck.
Yeah. I love that. I learned so much from Jadyn throughout this episode and definitely have a ways to go when it comes to personal finance. But I hope you leave with the encouragement that it's never too late to start becoming financially literate. It's easy to be ashamed about past financial decisions, but everyone is really on their own journey, so stay curious, be open to learning, and give yourself grace. I've linked the resources Jadyn referenced below and her TikTok, where there are tons of helpful videos about personal finance and financial literacy. Special announcement that next month's episode will be the season finale of season 2, which is always bittersweet, but till then, I'd love to hear your thoughts on our conversation. You can reach me via Instagram at the Making Space Podcast, where you should also follow for more content. Please rate or review the podcast wherever you listen, and share this episode with someone who would benefit from hearing our conversation. Thank you so much for being here, and I'll see you on the next episode of Making Space. Bye!